We're now on Daf Samach Gimel, and we're trying to prove up Samach Gimel and Beis, and we're trying to prove Abai's point that Ra'ah of Vayikra and Da'ah, Da'ah of Vayikra and Ra'ah of Dvarim are one and the same. Because if you're going to tell me that they're two different birds, then Michti, let's analyze this. We have a principle in interpreting the Mishnah Torah, meaning Sefer Dvarim, that Mishnah Torah Lasufehu Diyasa, that Mishnah Torahs are only coming to add to the rest of the Chumash, is Maishna Hachadechsiv Da'a. Why would the pasuk in Vayikra say Da, Maishna Hach, but here in Sefer Dvarim, Dechsiv Ra'a, Veloksiv Da? You understand what's going on over here? The whole principle and purpose of Sefer Dvarim is to add, and now you've subtracted. How do you justify that? Ella, we only have one conclusion to derive. Shma mina, min ra'a, uda achasi. Again, the Gemara is going to ask soon if ra and da are one and the same. Why does the Torah here in Vayikra use one word to describe and name the bird, and in Sefer Dvarim use another word? Okay, but hold on, and that kash is going to come later on. Gemara is going to still object and say, Akati Esrim Mechan Mishavi. We had 26. We reduced it to 25. But we didn't get to the magic number of 24. Omar Abayik Shem Shara V'da Achasi Kach Aya V'daya Achasi. We have another bird that appears only in Vayikra and not repeated in Dvarim, but rather a different name. It must be that that's one and the same bird and has different names. If you're going to tell me that these are two different birds, Aya and Daya, is Michti Mishli Torah Lo Sifu Di Asa, Maishna Hoch Dechsiv Limina Aya, Umashna Hosav Dechsiv Limina Adaya. What kind of addition is Dvarim adding to Vayikra when in Vayikra, Adarab, it says Lamina Adaya. Just one second, I got it right. Techsiv Lamina Aya, and then we fast forward to Dvarim and it says Lamina Adaya. So in effect, Dvarim is reducing instead of adding. Elolav Shmamina Aya V'daya Achasi. Okay, so now we have Aya V'daya a 1, and we've reduced it from 25 down to 24. Magic number, bingo. However, the Gemara says, why is the Torah confusing us by using two different names if you tell me it's exactly the same bird? And the Gemara answers, Sanya, Rebbe Omer, Ekra Ani Aya. The Torah could have called it Aya. Daya Laman Emra. Why did the Torah therefore come up with Daya? Why not just call it Aya? And the answer is Kadesh Lo Sitei Pischam Pele Baldin Lachlo. Right? In some areas, they'll say, wait a minute, this is not Aya, or this is Daya. Shalote Ata Kore Aya, Vahu Kore Daya, right? In one person or one locale, they'll call it Aya. In the other locale, they call it Daya. Or Ata Kore Daya, Vahu Kore Aya. And therefore, you know what? I have a different name for it. It's a different species, and therefore I'm allowed to eat it. Lekach kosav b'mishnah Torah v'hara'a v'es ha'aya vehadaya limina. So we see that all of these are taken together, and therefore we have a support for Abai's conclusion that it's the same bird. Meisvei, according to Rav, who says that there are 24 non-kosher birds, I'm going to challenge this with a brisa that says Lama Nishnu. Why are the names of the kosher birds repeated in Sefer Dvarim? We already have them in Sefer Yikra. B'Behema, first of all, I can justify why in the Torah that there has to be a repetition of the list of behemoths, because in Sefer Dvarim we add another non-kosher animal called the Shesua, which does not appear in Sefer Vayikra. And apparently there's a rule that once the Torah has to repeat one thing, it'll repeat everything else as well. Will be Ophos. And why did the Torah have to repeat the story of Ophos? Ifnei Hara'ah. Because in Mishnah Torah, in Sefer Dvarim, the Torah is going to add Ra'ah, which was omitted in Vayikra, my love, midvehema da hasa. Le'osufe, just like the Torah went through the entire list a second time around of behemoths in order to tell you that the shesua, yeah, because the shesua looks like a kosher animal. Just 1 second. Okay. Ofosnami lasufe. And now the Torah will repeat the list in order to add something. Anyway, this is against everything we've been saying. We see now that Ra'ah is added in Sefer Dvarim, not as another name of the same Da'ah, but rather another bird. Just like the Torah added an extra behema, shosas, lo, chasam, la sufi, v'havla. In the case of animals, the Torah wanted to add another animal that's non-kosher. In the case of birds, the Torah wanted to change the name, use a different name, so that we understand that these two birds are identical, just that they're different names, but they're all the same bird. And that's called lefrusha. So in any event, we finally came to the conclusion that there are 24 and Rav. Upligi, but Rav is against Rabbi Avo. The Rabbi Avo. Ra'a zu ayah. Well, it's true that the Ra is the same as the ayah of Lo Nikrishma Ra, Sheroa Biyoser. And it's called Ra because it has an uncanny faculty of vision, could see great distances, Sheroa Biyoser. V'cheinu Omer. And now we're quoting a pasuk in Eov. Nesiv lo yad'o oyat v'lo shezvachto ein ayah. A path not known to the ayit and not discovered by the eye of the ayah. Now, how great is the vision of this bird called Ra'ah? Omedes bebavel v'roa nevela be'eretz Yisrael. Bird is flying over the skies of Bavel, and it sees a carcass in Eretz Yisrael. It's going to fly over to eat that carcass. I'll tell you over something that my father Zechron Livrocha used to say in his drushes. He used to say that, why is this bird a non-kosher bird? And the answer is that the word nevela here symbolically, shivim panim Torah, means to see the lowliness in Eretz Yisrael. You could be all the way on the other side of the world, but you have what to complain about the land of Israel. That's a trait for bird, to always see the negative. So now the Gemara says the following. After Rabbi Avo says that Aya and Ra are the same, then Mida Ra, Hainu Aya, Michlal Teda, Hainu Ra, just like we saw before when we were explaining how Rav came to the number 24, that not only is Ra Aya, but Da is Ra, is Michte Mishnah Torah La Sufi Adiosu. We've seen this logic again. Maishna Hachadichsiv Da, Umaishna Hasam Dloksiv Da, Elav Shmamino Da V'Ra V'Aya Achasi. This was the logic of Abaye, that they're all the same bird. Umi Dura Hainu Aya, Michal Dedaya, Lav Hainu Aya. So now the Gemara is trying to explain Rabbi Avo. Rabbi Avo is of the opinion that the Ra is the Aya, but the Daya is not the Aya, because if you're identifying the Ra as the Aya, then Rabbi Avo holds that the Daya is not the Aya. But now I think what we're going to do here is we're going to change the number. Let's just see. Maishna Simtichsivli Mineu Aya. Umaishna Hocha in Dvarim. Delo Ksivli Mineu Aya Ella Adaya. Right? If we're saying that the list in Sefer Dvarim is coming to add something, to be more inclusive, then how come it omits the word Limineu with regard to the Aya? We're going to have to come to the conclusion that the Aya and Daya are one and the same. So Rivo now concedes that a Ra'ah and a Da'ah are one and the same. He also concedes that an Aya and the Daya are one and the same. And yet he himself, Rabbi Avo, had committed himself to the position that Ra and Aya are also one and the same. El Shma Mino, we have to conclude that Da v'Ra, Daya v'Aya, Achasi. So Rivo now is going to take a bird from the original cheshbon and of 24, and he's going to subtract it. So there are only 23 birds. Tanya, we learned to the Brisa, Isi ben Yehuda Omer, Mea Ofos Tmeim Yesh b'Mizrach. We have 100 different species of non-kosher birds in the east. V'kulon min ayahin, and all of them are part of the Aya umbrella. Tani avimi bereid Rav Avo shvamios mine dogim. Hey, there are 700 different types of non-kosher fish. Ushmonamios mine chagavim, and 800 species of non-kosher grasshoppers. Uliofosein mispar. We can't attach any number to the birds. They're infinite. So Gemara asks Ophos Esrin V'Arba, how can you tell me that the number of species of non-kosher birds is incountable, innumerable, when we just finished saying that there are 24 types of non-kosher birds? Ella, the Ophos Tahorim ein mispar. There's no limit to the number of species of kosher birds. Tanya, we learned to the Brisa Rebbe, Omegolav Yadulf Name Mishomer of Hayol clear to Hashem, that there are more non-kosher animals than kosher animals. So therefore, it made more sense that the Torah would tell me what are the kosher animals, because there are so many more non-kosher animals. That there are more kosher birds than there are non-kosher birds. And therefore the Torah counts the non-kosher birds. And now the Gemara doesn't understand why Rebbe has to tell me that. I mean, it's obvious. Maika mashmalon. And the Gemara answers Kid Rav Huna Amarav that Rav wanted to teach me something about pedagogy, about Mesiras HaTorah. A person should teach his students in a very concise manner. By the way, this is not so pashut. It's good to be concise if you're afraid that by being more wordy it'll be confusing. But if by being more wordy it'll be clarifying, then just go on and on until it's absolutely clear. My Rebbe used to go on for hours and hours. I remember one year, it happens to be on it was on Thanksgiving. It was about Sadazu, Sadastam. He went for 4.5 hours. And he finally said, okay, go eat your turkey. Anyway, Omer Rabbi Yitzchak, Of Tahar Nechal B'Mesores. If you want to eat, and first to identify a kosher bird and then eat it, then it should be based on a Mesores. No, it's apparently with all the simanim, we're still not 100% sure. Nemanat Sayed Lomar Of Zetar Masali Rebbe. A tzayad who hunts birds is relied upon to tell me that this is a kosher bird because I heard it from my Rebbe. Now, what does that mean? He has a tradition from his Rebbe. His Rebbe was also a hunter of birds, or his Rebbe was a Torah scholar? That's what the Gemara wants to know here. Right? The teacher of the hunter has to know how to identify all the non-kosher birds to be sure that this is not one of them. And he has to know their names also. We discussed that. Boy, Reb Zera has a doubt as to how to interpret Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbo Chacham or Rabbo Tzayad. When we rely on the hunters, because the hunter is relying on his hunter Rebbe, who taught him which are the kosher birds, or the hunter is relying on a Torah scholar. Now, obviously, a Torah scholar is not going to be able to identify all the birds, that are out there. Toshma, the Amar Rabbi Yochanan V'Usha Baki B'Hem Shmo Seyem, Iyam B'Shleim Rabbo Sayad. If you can tell me that the hunter is relying on the hunter's teacher, who is himself a hunter, the shopper, then I understand very well. He's familiar with all the 24 species of non-kosher birds, and he can identify this bird as a kosher bird. If he's quoting his Rebbe, who's a Torah scholar, is Bishlei Mashmayahu Gomerle. Okay, he knows, the names of the 24 non-kosher birds. Ela Inu Miyadalu. Can he be familiar with these birds? Each one of the 24, he knows their names, but can he identify them? Elav Shmamino, Rabo, Sayad, Shmamino. Tanarabonon, now we get to eggs. The question is whether there's simonim in eggs that you can tell that this egg came from a kosher bird. Lochim beitzim in ovdei kachal b'chol makom. You could buy eggs. Now we're assuming now it means full eggs as opposed to smashed egg, eggs that you mix up. Ein choshin lo mishum nevelos lo mishum trefos. I don't get it. How could it be that we're going to rely on an idol worshiper to tell me that this egg is a kosher egg? Maybe this egg is the egg of a non-kosher bird. Amar Avo de Shmuel. Okay, remember that Avo de Shmuel. because the whole sugya that we're going to learn is around revolves around Avodah Shmuel. Be Omer shel of ploni tar. In other words, the akum, the guy, is going to point to a bird, and he's going to say that these eggs came from that bird, and we're going to identify that bird as a kosher bird, and therefore we're going to trust and rely on the akum that the eggs that he's selling us came from that bird. Now we have to add something here. We can ascertain the truth by comparing these eggs to eggs of that type. So the guy could be caught lying. Why? Because he says that these eggs came from that bird, and we identify that bird as a kosher bird. Well, you know what? We're going to take the eggs of a kosher bird and we can compare it to his eggs. And if he's lying, we'll be able to discover that he's lying. He doesn't want to get caught lying. Frek the Gemara, v'lema shel of tar. Why does the guy have to specify this kosher bird? Even if he doesn't specify it. What if he just says, these are eggs of a kosher bird? And the answer is obvious. We'll never be able to find out whether he's lying or telling the truth. He's just telling us it's a kosher bird. Maybe it is a kosher bird. Maybe it's not. We need a system of verification. Why do we need the akum to tell me whether these eggs are kosher or not kosher? We have simanim that will tell us proof positive whether or not these eggs are kosher. The Sanya, we went to the Brisa, kisimani beitzim, kach simani dogim. That if you find eggs of a fish, I think that's called caviar, I'm not sure. Anyway, and they have a certain shape, that shape in the eggs of a bird, start again. If you have eggs of a kosher fish, that will give you the simanim of the eggs of a kosher bird. In other words, the eggs of a kosher bird are similar to the eggs of a kosher fish. Fekta Gemara, simani dogim salkedaitach? Are you telling me that I'm going to use the simanim of a fish to determine whether these eggs are kosher or not? That doesn't make any sense. Snapir v'kaskeses omer achmanim, right? Fins and scales will tell me whether the fish is kosher. Ela ema, but let's clarify the meaning of this price the way we said it just before, that kach simone, we're on now on daf samach dalid. We'll go a little bit over time to make it a little bit easier for tomorrow. Ubre dogin. In other words, the eggs of kosher birds are similar to the caviar, the roe, R-O-E, of a kosher fish. The roe is a cluster of eggs contained within the ovarian membrane of a female fish. The shape of roe in kosher fish is similar to the shape of eggs in kosher birds, which sounds mind-boggling. Vitanya, we learned Gabi Beitzim, with regard to eggs, Elu hein simoni beitzim, these are the signs of kosher birds' eggs. Kol shekoderes vagul goles, they are round in shape. We'll soon see that it's not exactly round, but it's basically round in shape. The rosha echad kad, one part of the egg, let's say the top part of the egg, is completely rounded. The rosha, but the bottom part of the egg is chad. It's a little bit narrow, a little bit slightly bit tapered. So it's not completely round like a ball, but one end rounded and the other tapered to an elliptical shape. This is typical of the familiar chicken egg. However, even if two ends appear equally rounded to the eye, but upon measuring one end, it's found to be slightly tapered, then the eggs are kosher. Tahor. Shnei roshim kadim. O shnei roshim chadim tmeim. If there's no tapered end, but they're round completely exactly like a ball, or if they're tapered both on the top and on the bottom, tmeim. We know it's a non-kosher egg. Now we have another way of determining through simonim whether it's a kosher egg or not. Chelbo mibachutz v'chelmo mibifnim. If the white part of the egg is on the outside and the yolk is on the inside, like all of our eggs, tahoru, we know it's kosher. But chelmo mibachutz v'chelmo mibifnim, if the yolk is on the outside and the white of the egg is on the inside, tmeah. Chelmon v'chelbon me'uravim ze bezeh. If you have an egg and both the chelmon and the chelbon are mixed together, the Gemara is going to explain that later. It's an egg from a crawling creature. So anyway, we go back to our case of buying eggs from an idolater, and we have ways through simonim of determining by examination whether or not it's a kosher egg. So why does Avud Shmuel say that the idolater has to specify that this egg came from this particular bird so that we can do the system of verification? Lo tzricha dechatuchos. What happens if you cannot determine the shape of the egg because they're cut open? But there's another way of determining whether the egg is kosher, not livdok v'chelmon v'chelmon. We'll check the yolk and the white of the egg. And where it says betrufos bekara, these eggs were cracked open and beaten together in a dish, and you can no longer differentiate between the yolk and the white of the egg. So you don't have that option as a simon. This Gemara here of betrufos bekara is incredibly difficult, because Avud Shmuel said we need some system of verification. This akum is telling me that this beaten up egg comes from a kosher animal, a kosher bird. How do we rely on it? Can you buy beaten eggs from an idol worshiper? If you have a beitza of a treifa bird, don't sell it to a guy, because he may pass it on to a Jew and say, well, I got it from a Jew. Elam kain trufa b'kara. If it's beaten in a bowl, what does that mean? It's beaten in a bowl? If the Jew beats up the beitzas treifa in a bowl, he could sell it to a guy. Because if the guy sells it to a Jew, the Jew's not going to buy beaten eggs from a guy. We can never purchase beaten eggs from a guy. So how then can Shmuel say that we purchase this from a guy? It must be he's talking about unbeaten eggs. No, if it's unbeaten eggs, then we go back to square one. Why does the idolater, according to Avud Shmuel, have to tell me exactly which kosher bird these eggs came from? Well, we can examine the eggs and determine if they have the right configuration. They have the simonim. Elam Rab Zera simonim lav da'oraisa. So here we get to the breakthrough in this whole sugya, that the Torah itself doesn't rely on identifying a kosher egg by its shape, because it's always possible that maybe there was a non-kosher egg that had that same shape. So the Torah itself would not rely on simanim, but if you can add X plus Y, and you have two factors that we can integrate together that indicate that these eggs are kosher, then we could use simanim as one of those two factors, and the second factor is the identification of the bird from which it came by the akum. We had a list of 8 birds or species of birds that were questionable. We didn't know whether or not they were kosher birds or non-kosher birds, and therefore we're not allowed to eat them. Frekta Gemara, lived up with beitzim didu. Why not check out the eggs of these 8 species? Do they have the shape and the configuration of kosher eggs? Elishmam, simanim lavdo rice. The Torah doesn't rely on simanim. So if you buy eggs from an idolater, it's not sufficient to examine their shape and configuration, even though that would be a siman that is a kosher egg. But simanim lavdo rice, so the Torah doesn't rely on simanim, and therefore we have to add another element into the equation, that the guy who sells you the eggs, he's going to tell you that they came from this particular kosher bird. El lamai hilchasa katani la. So what do we get from the signs of a kosher egg? Hachi kama shnei rashem kadim o shnei rashem chadim o chelma v'chutz chelma shalom shalom v'adei tmeya reisha chad v'chad reisha chad v'chad chelbon v'chutz v'chelbon v'fnim v'amar lecha shalof ploni v'tarhu, then smoch alayhu. If it has the simone beitzim of an of tar, and he tells you that these are the eggs of such and such a bird, then we'll add A plus B equals C. Smoke halai, you could rely on the gut. But bistama, if the idolater says that the eggs came from a kosher bird, but he cannot tell you which kosher bird, lo tismach halayhu, don't rely on the guy, even though you have signs of kashas. But we're holding now, like I'm saying, that what simanim lavdoraisa the ika de urva de dami lidion, because the non-kosher eggs of an orev, which whatever it is, are similar to the eggs of an orev, are similar to the eggs of a yona, of a dove, and therefore you might think that these simanim indicate that this is a kosher egg, but in truth it looks like the eggs of a yona, but in fact it might just possibly be the eggs of an orev. Okay, we'll just read a little bit further. Omar Mar, Chelbon v'chelbon muravim, said we didn't understand what it means that the two parts of the yellow and the white were mixed together. V'yadushi beitzis hasheretz. What does that mean? So what's the case? Omar Mar Rav Ukva bar Chama lomar she'im rikma v'nikva mitama ke'adosha. If the egg had already formed an embryo inside the egg, and now you pierce the shell, then it conveys tumah ke'adasha, when the embryo is dead and has the volume of a lentil. Okay, so we'll pick that up in Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow, review it again, so that we can move on in the sugya here on Daf Samach Daled B'Siyata D'Shmaya. Wishing you a great day and a meaningful fast.